Welcome, everyone. My name is Becky Schultz, and I'm Vice President of Content for KHL Group's Power Division and editor of what was formerly Diesel Progress magazine and just recently became Power Progress. I'd like to welcome you to this session, The Future of Battery Technology for Industrial Vehicles. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and it will be available to watch on demand following this session. If you have any questions during this session, please add them to the Q&A function that you can find at the right side of your screen. Just go ahead and add those questions or comments to it. Note that your questions will be sent privately. We will have a poll of the audience at the beginning of this discussion, and then we'll address questions throughout or as time allows at the end of the session. If we don't get to your questions, we will share the responses following the event and publish them where you can access the recording. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Brendan Sauer, President of Discover Energy Systems. Darren Britton, Senior Director, Trojan Battery Company. Paulus Gentil, Chief Technical Officer for Flux Power, and Rod Dayrick, Director of Business Development for Delta Q Technologies. So let's get started. At this point, you'll notice that a few questions will be popping up on your screen. We'll ask that you please take a moment to register your responses, which will give our panel a sense of where everyone is located regionally, what markets you represent, and where you are in your electrification journey. All right, we'll give it just another minute. Hopefully those questions have popped up and you'll be able to see them. If not, please let us know in the Q&A box. All right, well, thank you for that. And I think now we'll just go ahead and jump into our discussion. I'd like to start off by asking our panel, how would you describe the state of battery technology? Where are we? Where have we been? Where are we going? And perhaps, Brendan, can we have you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. It's been, I guess, almost over a decade since I was living in a lithium factory, kind of scratching together BMSs and chasing down materials for just the balance of systems. And when I reflect on industry today, I'm continually amazed by what I'd say we're in a battery renaissance. The technology is quite mature. The struggle now is really trying to understand how to navigate quite a noisy space. So I would characterize where we're at today as just saying, generally speaking, the needs that'll help you electrify are there. It's all about just finding the right partner to help you actually commercialize that or bring the technology to your plate. So I say it's noisy because there has been a lot of investment into just the cell supply manufacturing as well as integrators and battery companies. So you're probably going to wake up every morning with somebody blinking at you, trying to sell you a battery. So just be careful. But it's quite simple. The technology is available today in a practical way for us to electrify our equipment.
All right, we're having a little bit of audio trouble there, Brendan.
Oh, am I unclear or just not?
It's sounding better now. I'll go ahead and mute again if you want to maybe repeat your last statement.
Sure. I would summarize the state of technology as one of just a pragmatic approach. I don't want to say I can guarantee, but if you're looking at your electrification needs, it's very likely that the technology is available to help you get started today. It may not be perfect, but it's pretty close. Get your journey started today, because in 3 or 4 or 5 years, you'll be totally dialed in. Does that sound better?
Yes, that was much better. Thank you. You had mentioned it being a noisy space. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Or maybe one of the other panelists would like to comment on that, because I think there are some challenges there in helping to navigate that.
Sure, I'll just give my 2 cents and then let everyone else step in. I actually just got back from China, which generally speaking is the center of the universe for lithium batteries today. It's a noisy space as it became an investment space for a lot of folks. So, there's overcapacity for cells. There was overcapacity for integrators. There was overcapacity for just groups jumping in and making batteries. So it became a noisy space because you really had to do your due diligence in terms of, you wanted quality, you wanted reputation, you wanted a group that was going to be around for a while. So likely everyone's getting a LinkedIn message from somebody who wants to sell them a battery every morning.
Exactly. So any other comments?
I would like to add to that noise. I mean, alongside with what Brendan had already stated in terms of knowing what's out there, doing your due diligence, you also have to be aware of all the different chemistries and technologies out there, right? We have lead acid that has been the predominant power source for decades, right? And now we're getting introductions of lithium, iron phosphate, sodium ion, and whatnot. So it's really just being aware of your requirements, what you're looking for, your goals in electrifying your solutions, and then catering it to the battery.
Great. Any other comments from other?
Yeah, Becky, I'll interject a little bit just along those lines. The noisy space comment makes a lot of sense. Not only the space has changed a lot over just the last few years. We thought we were going to see the demise of iron phosphate. It has since made what I'd call a massive resurgence, even into automotive. If you're from material handling and you're looking to electrify, there are numerous chemistries available to you. We see lots of iron phosphate, NMC, NCA, other cobalt-based chemistries, as well as LTO, which is lithium titanium oxide. It's very expensive, but it's also very safe. So, depending on your particular needs, that's some of what you'll have to navigate. There are lots of offerings on the market across that range. So you'll see lots of companies attempting to educate their consumers and customers, putting out quite a bit of literature telling you why one would choose one versus the other. So there is a lot of noise in this space.
All right. I think perhaps we can move on unless, Darren, you have something to add?
No, I'll take it up on the next question.
Okay.
I believe.
All right. Sounds good. Since we're starting to talk about the technology, let's take a look at that in what's available in the industrial and commercial equipment sectors. What are some of the innovations across both batteries and charger technologies? And maybe we can start off with Darren taking the lead on this one.
Absolutely, happy to. It's a great question. We just got back from PGA show, and we saw everything from lithium to supercapacitors, different forms of lithium, different technologies as far as form factors. You have prismatic, cylindrical, pouch. So kind of going back to the last question, there is a ton of noise out there. You've got solid state batteries. The telematics part of it enters into it. What does the battery have from a telematic standpoint? Is it reporting up to the cloud? Is it cellular, Wi-Fi based? We saw something at PGA show that was a first, which was wireless charging. There was a huge large vehicle that carried 6 passengers that you could park in your garage, and it had wireless charging completely integrated into the vehicle with a pad underneath it. So it's exciting. It's a very exciting time for the technology in the space. But going back to what Brendan and Rod and Paulus has said, it's extremely noisy because we have to start this conversation sooner than later, especially if you're an OEM. You need to be looking at, what does my infrastructure look like? What am I going to be designing? Am I designing a building around the infrastructure so we can support all of the electrification of the vehicles that we want? So it's an exciting time, and there's a lot of technology to choose from, and it's just it's kind of weeding through that noise to understand what's the best fit for your application and the solution, the right solution for you.
Any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the comment earlier. Definitely, the industry seems to be settling in on lithium iron phosphate. One of the manufacturing bases there. The production's quite mature, automated, and it's efficient from a cost point of view. Some things you'll see, the BMS technology. There was 10 years ago, a lot of the BMSs are quite fragile. I could tell you 100 different ways to grenade a BMS, as I would say. But they're very sophisticated today. So we're past that early adopter phase, and we're really at a point where I'd say there's less risk. So the technology is mature. A lot of the bugs have been worked out. A lot of the integrations known. So that might be my comment there.
Okay, there is a question that came in asking about sodium-ion battery technology for industrial vehicles. And it's asking, does the cheaper battery price fully compensate for the lower energy density of these cells?
I had a great conversation on the sodium-ion technology a couple of weeks ago, and the biggest comment I got back, and these are sitting with executives that are running factories that are putting through 20, 30 gigawatt hour a year in each facility. The input material cost for lithium iron phosphate right now is so cheap. It's not cheap, but the prices are low enough that sodium ion doesn't quite make sense from a financial point of view right now. So that was their biggest input. I'm sure there's more sides and more context to that discussion.
Yeah,
that's the takeaway I had last week.
Yeah, I could add into it because I've been following sodium ion pretty closely. With sodium ion, the key driver is the supply chain aspect of it, right? Iron phosphate or iron, it's readily available, but from the sodium perspective, cost is really going to be king, as well as the ability to supply, right? Now the question goes back to the trade-off analysis between the performance of energy density, because sodium ion does have a lower energy density than any of the lithium chemistries, whether it be actually not any. It's a little bit higher than titanate or titanium oxide, but there is going to be niche applications and niche markets that could cater to sodium ion. But that is along with the noise that we had mentioned earlier. You really have to understand what the goal is of your electrification path, right? Your solution. What are the priorities involved? Because that's going to necessitate what type of technologies and what type of supply chain infrastructure and investments are happening with those battery technologies.
To Rod's point, nickel zinc is another one that has come up, especially on the stationary side, but also on the motive side. And it's interesting, but to Brendan and Rod's point, it's not mature. Lithium is mature. There's plenty of people out there wanting to bring it to you, but there's only a handful of nickel zinc people that are offering it. So while it could be a good alternative, depending on the solution the person needs or the company needs, lithium obviously is much more mature and robust in the supply chain.
All right, great. Any other comments?
I might add one last comment. That's perhaps a good segue to our next topic. You could sit here and discuss different cell chemistries and different MOSFET technologies and BMS. but don't delay your electrification because it just sets you one more year behind. Really, my best guidance is just to get started because you're going to learn a lot of things that you never foresaw, and it won't be related to chemistry. It'll be related to some kind of integration challenge. So don't wait for the perfect technology. It's never going to be around, or the perfect chemistry. There's always a trade-off. Just get started.
Great.
That's a good point.
Very good point. And before we move on to our next point of discussion, we do still have our poll questions active. If you haven't completed the poll, if you could do so at this time, this may help to inform some of the further responses further in our discussion. Let's move on to another topic. I'd like to ask you all what you see as some of the opportunities and challenges facing the adoption of battery-powered equipment in the industrial and commercial sectors. And maybe this time, Brendan, you can start us off again.
Yeah, I had some notes earlier ruminated on this. Definitely seeing trending, or equipment's trending to higher voltages. That's typically to reduce the currents. Many years ago, there was a few applications that I was reviewing, and you'd always hear folks say, "Oh no, if you had a big motor, my inrush current's only 30 amps, and my sustained currents is only, 20." And you actually go review it, and there's 800 amps inrush current, and steady state was 70 amps, which just turns into different challenges around BMS and temperatures. But that being said, so we're trending towards higher voltages, and it's a place that most equipment's never been. They're either 12, 24, 36, perhaps 48, and we're jumping to 96, jumping to, 100 or plus. And that typically requires talking to new charger vendors, all kinds of new components. So that's something we're definitely seeing, and I agree with it, but you may not find products that are off the shelf that are perfect for what you need. So it's all about engaging with your vendors and your suppliers to, work together to help you electrify. Also, if you're reviewing your goals for electrification, you may need to understand your infrastructure needs. So what we see quite often now, I shouldn't say quite often, but it's becoming more pertinent, is there just enough power on site to charge the equipment? So I've seen fleets being electrified only for the company to realize there's not enough power on site to actually charge the machines. So there's also solutions to that. You drop kind of containers of energy storage that'll slowly charge throughout the day, and then when you're ready to charge, they'll put out a lot of power. So you need to also review the entire infrastructure chain, perhaps. The charge, I'd say that it's also interesting to see how much integration there is between the charger, the BMS, and what is available for the equipment. So that's also perhaps what I would observe is one of the most difficult or timely exercises when electrifying, is to get that integration all buttoned up. And that may be an opportunity to kind of listen and learn as to what everyone else is doing. So there are standards such as CanOpen CIA 418, 419, which in my opinion are actually not that great for lithium, but it's a good place to start. It's a standardized protocol. But that's actually where I see some of the longest projects in electrification. It's actually getting the firmware, software integration all done. And it's really easy just to throw positive, negative together and off you go. But I might open it up for maybe more discussion with the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, I
think one of the.
Oh, go ahead, Darren.
Go ahead, Rod. I was just going to say, I think one of the challenges we've seen from an electrification standpoint is, in the industry, the commercial sector especially, you've got a lot of OEM equipment manufacturers in the construction industry that are trying to or are electrifying, and a lot of this equipment gets put out on a job site, and there's very limited power. So they're trying to navigate how do we put a piece of equipment out long term and we're able to charge it on site, whether that be a hybrid type of scenario with a small engine integrated with a lithium battery, or just a lithium pack with, like Rod said, or Brendan said, with the dropping like a container of energy, which we've seen that as well. But it's a good problem to have, because there's a lot of rental equipment that will be electrified, I think, in the next probably 2 years. A lot of OEMs are already moving towards that, but that's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that is a good segue to talking about the importance of charging, understanding the architecture or the infrastructure that's there and available, and addressing that big concern, especially so going back to the polls, I see majority of the folks here are from North America, right? North America's electric infrastructure is catered around 120 volts AC, right? A lot of the equipment that we're looking at, I mean, you go to the second poll, material handling, construction, right? Majority of those are heavy power usage type products, right? Higher power, higher energy. So you have to be able to have the infrastructure set up. And I think we're going to be talking about the importance of optimization of battery and chargers. So I don't know if this is the right timing to bring that up, but it is critical because.
Sorry, Rob, go ahead. No, there's probably one. Oh, we're doing battles here. So there might be one more topic to ruin it before we jump into the charging side of, it's one I'm excited to talk about. I forgot to mention some of the opportunities in integrated electrifying is you've looking at a really good list of vendors here. So I'm still seeing RFQs and requirement docs and functional requirements coming out from OEMs, and it's quite clear that they're written by folks that have never done this before. So without getting into it, I might just say, reach out and find a vendor or a supply chain that fits your needs and can work with you. Even though the technology is quite mature, that relationship between OEM and vendor, it's less of a partnership and more of a battle on price, I'd say. But there's still use cases and edge cases to work through that your vendors can help you. And a lot of that's to do with, once again, edge cases, your temperature, you're charging at low temperature, your high currents, high temperature. It is a challenging, or there's usually challenging use cases where there's just those few edge cases or few conditions that you need to think about, or you might need to kind of back off a little bit and say, well, no, I'm not going to be running this equipment at minus 40 degrees C. It's just not plausible. But you do have a lot of great vendors to reach out and try to develop more of a partnership as opposed to a black and white relationship of here's my requirements, can you do it?
Right, and that we see on a constant basis, because like the folks on the in the audience right now, material handling, well, not so much material handling, but construction, it's been primarily combustion based, right? So they don't have the inclination, so to speak, on the full integration of an electrified drive and powertrain, right? So it's working through that partnership with trusted vendors, right? We have various here, but it's really going to be catered to your requirements. So great point, Brendan.
Yeah, to further build upon that, I mean, you generally always want something off the shelf because it is costly to make something custom, but the more you engage, the more you might find that something does exist, but it may not perfectly fit your equipment. It may be time now to change that battery compartment if there is one already, or adapt to that technology. So there's definitely a negotiation, and I'm not meaning a negotiation of finance or price. It's a negotiation of trade-offs of technology.
Hollis, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, let me add to that. One thing that we find in the material handling world, especially, with larger companies doing 24/7 operations is that it's really the charger that is keeping up with the workload. And so having that constant high power charge capability is really important for that type of application. Um, Many companies find they do have to rewire their infrastructure in order to make a switch from, say, something like lead acid to lithium or propane to lithium, both of which we displace. Um, so, the overall size of the battery, it is important, but then when you get to the 24/7 operation, you're charging every couple hours on a break or a lunch, and that's where it's really more about you have to get that energy in to replace what you've taken out, and we find that we don't cycle through the entire SOC of the battery. We don't drain it all the way down. Most of the time, we stay above 50 or 60% SOC, but the charger returning the energy at a sufficient rate to continue operating is really what's important there. So that does take a lot of power. So when I noticed there was a question about agricultural Brazil, and I imagine that's even more challenging. But one good thing about lithium and the various chemistries like lithium is that if you do have a diesel generator, then you can do your charging very fast, and lithium tops off very nicely at high currents, and then you can shut down your generator. So you will get a better efficiency out of your energy usage than some of the older chemistries where, say, above 80%, you had to do a float charge and wait a long time.
So I guess to add to that question regarding agricultural equipment. So I was at Agritechnica last, I believe it was October of 23. And it's interesting because agriculture equipment, there's a lot of similarities to construction equipment, but the the uh, the country that was housing Agritechnica was Germany. Um, and it's interesting because it's gonna be very specific to your regional intentions of agriculture. In Germany, they produce a heavy amount of their own electricity through PV and alternative energies like wind and whatnot. So they have more than enough access to power. It's not grid dependent. It's not infrastructure dependent. They have the ability. So in that respect, they are electrifying faster than other regions, but it's going to be very region specific when you address certain markets for electrification.
All right, great. And any other comments on that before we move on? All right, let's move into the next question. Why is compatibility between battery and charging solutions important? And Rod, can you kick us off on this?
Yeah, I think that is a great topic. Brendan and the rest of the panel have kind of touched base on this a little bit. But if you think about just a regular battery and charger, so let's start off with lead acid. With lead acid, it has to have a certain charge profile based off of the actual chemistry makeup of the battery. And lead acid, as we know, is just positive and negative terminals. There's no communication path. So in that respect, optimizing the charge profile for that battery is going to be key. When you start looking at electrification, the first thing that you usually look for is a motor for your drivetrain, right? And then from there, you look at the battery next. The battery is one of the most expensive bill of materials on your costed BOM, right? So if you're spending a high rate of cost on a battery, you better make sure that you're optimizing your battery for performance and or life cycle, right? So optimization in the relationship between battery and charging is going to be key because it all equates back to the dollars spent and the value of that battery. The charger will enable an extension of performance and life for that battery. That's number one. Number two is there's been advancements, and Brendan had mentioned this in terms of BMS integration and whatnot. So BMS, if the audience is not fully aware, that's battery management systems. So right, that's the electronics and the safety mechanisms on the battery itself, predominantly lithium. It's being more evident in some other chemistries now, but it allows for the battery to become more intelligent, right? Lead acid, you get what you pay for in terms of the actual battery itself. It's all self-contained, but there's no two-way communication. With lithium and some other technologies and chemistries that are coming about, there's that two-way communication between the battery and the charger, right? There's methods where the charger could still have that control mechanism where it charges optimally based off characterization of the battery. But now with advancements and I believe the panel has said the maturity levels of especially lithium, right? There's capabilities where the battery could tell the charger, hey, I'm in this environment where the ambient temperature is very high. Reduce my charge rate. Or, hey, I'm having SOC levels very low, right? At very low levels, don't put as much current in. There's so many other parameters that now the battery can control real time with the charger itself, right? So that's number two. Number three is addressing infrastructure, right? So charging and battery now have the capabilities, and you're seeing it on automotive electric vehicles, to have access to EVSCs, their electric vehicle charging stations, whether it's public and or mobile, right? So the ability not only to have portable power stations, as Brendan and Darren had suggested, but having the ability to use the automotive infrastructure that is being set in place for electric vehicle cars, right? So that integration with BMS charger, system level integration, as well as charging stations, is now becoming more available and integrated into solutions. And it's happening in going back to the polls of the markets, in material handling, construction. You're starting to see it because there are limitations on infrastructure that we have, especially here in North America, where we only have 120 volt, but there's cases where you need higher voltage that could deliver higher currents. So there's a big picture to this, but there's a lot of little things because it really depends on your requirements. But the key message here is optimization, right? Because when OEMs start electrifying, they want to get the most use out of the battery and all the components that are integrating into the units. The battery has its own benefits, but charging is a big part of it. And if that relationship is not there, if you're not optimizing the battery performance with respect to charging, then the value of that battery that you purchased depletes. So I'm sure there's other comments from the panel.
Darren, would you like to start us off with some comments?
I think it's Rod has a great point. It's a lot of the technology we see, outside of lithium has come from the charger side of the world. And then with lithium, it's even more important. It's very important to have that communication between the two. Just like Rod said, the charger and the battery can poll each other to see what is the temperature of the vehicle, what's the ambient temperature of the battery, start that off slow and then ramp up as the temperature comes down, which again, that's the longevity of the battery. That's going to help the battery last the cycles it needs to, as well as the infrastructure. That's, again, to me, the charging standpoint is huge. And that's where, as Brendan talked about in the very beginning, a lot of thought needs to be put into that. Where are the vehicles going? Where are they going to be maintained? The charger company that you choose, that can deliver the amount of power within your infrastructure is very critical. And then the integration part of it, you have to be able to talk. You have the OEM who wants to go lithium, and to Brendan's point, there's a lot of them that are transitioning from, and I think Paula said it as well, it's transitioning from a diesel over to a lithium platform possibly. And they're out there, they're trying to do it. They're used to the diesel side of it. They're starting to play in the lithium side of it. And you've got to partner with someone who can deliver both the battery, but as well as a charger company or a charging system that can deliver the power that they're going to need to maintain that battery wherever it's at in the world. And that's a critical piece of this.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do specifications fall into that? Are there any standard means to standardize battery charging system and charging performance?
I might try to answer that by not answering it directly. The only standardization might be in your protocols to make it a bit easier. You've got different SAE protocols or CAN open. That might help you along the way. But in my opinion, I guess charging a lithium battery is pretty easy. You just throw a power supply on it. But it's when you start to deploy in an application where there's a lot of benefit. So when I keep speaking of edge cases, an edge case to me is usually one where the only response that BMS has is I'm going to disconnect from the load of the charge source, because the primary job of a BMS is to ensure that the cells are not being operated outside of their operating spec, which is related to voltage, current, temperature. So when you are talking to the charger, and it's even better if you can integrate the motor control of the loads, as Rod said, you can start to say, hey, you know what? Ambient temperature is a little bit high. Don't give me all the current you can. We're going to start to derate so that the BMS itself, I don't have to disconnect from the charger. Likewise, if it is cold, you might need to start to heat the battery. So the battery can reach out to the charger and go, you know what, just give me this many watts because I'm going to redirect that to my heating circuit. And so during that integration, it allows you to actually give the user a better experience, because they're not going to experience these hard disconnects or faults where the battery says, I can't take any more. So that, to me, the integration is all about just providing a really good user experience primarily. So, but is there standardizations? Not quite. It's more down to how, are you selecting a charger and a battery group that they've done, they've integrated for the last 10 or 15 years. They know what's going on. The protocol's done. No bolt-on and motor controller where, that integration is also being done. So less standardization and more just companies that have been working together for a few years.
No.
Any other comments?
Yeah, let me jump in on that. That actually, no, he's right. So I'd say over the last 10 years, the Flux BMS, we have had to integrate something like 20 separate protocols. But actually, and Delta Q were one of the first to do it. There are a couple standards. They come from CAN in Automation, CIA. So there's, I believe it's 418, 419. But that does outline sort of a standard way for a lithium battery to communicate with a charger or any type of battery. And we've been having that push from some of our customers. They're finding out that if they've got different facilities, and some of them do move equipment around, they're suddenly finding out one thing doesn't work with another, or you have to go change a protocol. So because of that push from some of our larger customers, we've worked hard to get our partners to try to comply with some of those CIA standards. It's not super specific, but it does at least give you a way to query the charger, know exactly which charger, and then sort of, if you will, at the very least have like an auto detect so that you can work across these multiple chargers. I mean, it would be great if they all just spoke the same dialect. But I think that's slowly coming, especially as customers demand it, because as you know, customers king. So just 2 cents on that.
Great. Any other comments before we move on to our final point?
I just build upon that great point. That kind of brings you to some of the decision making on onboard versus offboard. So if you are onboard charging, it gives you kind of a tighter set of requirements where you may be able to do something more specific. But if you are working offboard and different facilities, different chargers, you would run into some use cases where you'd have to solve the question, well, which charger am I talking to today? But back to you, Becky.
All right, great. So let's move on to our final point of discussion for this today's session. What innovations are you seeing across energy density, charging capabilities, and overall performance? And maybe Darren, why don't we have you start us off?
Can I hear the question one more time? I'm thinking.
Sure. It's what innovations are you seeing across energy density, charging capabilities, and overall performance? Is that one you feel comfortable responding to?
Performance, yeah, densities are high. I think Brendan even spoke to it. It seems like voltages are going way up. The customer's demanding more density. The infrastructure needs are much greater, and they're asking a lot of the battery in their performance. Especially the OEMs, when we look at like construction applications, it seems like they keep going a lot higher on voltages. The batteries are much bigger, so they're asking a lot.
Yeah, I could add to that. There's a lot of new additives and new chemistry. Well, not chemistries, but actual elements that are being added to the batteries themselves. Take, for instance, graphene. It allows for higher energy densities, more life cycles. There's a lot of talk, if you're familiar with batteries, on silicon anode, right? There's a lot of limitations in the past where cycle life was low, but energy density was high. They've gone past that, where they've saw a lot of innovation to mitigate the low cycle life, right? But it does revolve back around to what your real intention of your product is, right? Because you could over design the technology of your battery for your product, but does it make commercial sense? That's going to really be the big question, right? Commercial sense, as well as development and integration time to market, right? Sometimes you over design, right? I mean, it happens a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that meet your business case?
I'd say theoretical densities may be slowly increasing. My reflection on it is you've got standardized product that's off the shelf versus what you may need. So in order to get the most density, you might need to work with your vendor to optimize a battery shape that fits with that equipment. Because oftentimes we'll see really interesting dimensional requirements that will lead to a lower energy density just because the cells won't fit. Or the other side of the equation is someone is asking for such high densities that really the trade-off is maybe some thermal management. The battery's going to run hotter. So their theoretical densities are slowly going up, but I'd say once again, back to that relationship with your vendor. If you have the flexibility to design that battery compartment, really to maximize that space, it's a bit of a relationship to develop a battery that's going to use or optimize the most that it can with those dimensions. On the charger side, I mean, power just keeps going up. So yeah, density is going up, power's going up. It's amazing. 10 years ago, you'd be looking at a 650 watt charger thinking, wow, that's a nice form factor. Now, in some of the applications, we're looking at 30, 60 kilowatt, up to 125 kilowatt of, charging. Sorry, Darren.
I was going to say, Brendan, to your point, I think it's sizing the solution appropriately to the customer's need. And that goes back to the density. We've had a lot, you had a lot come to the table with aspirations of extreme high density, extreme high voltages. But then when you ask, well, what is the life of the equipment? What are the life of the battery that you're looking for, the warranty of the battery. When you start looking at it, then you start kind of coming back to what's appropriate, what is appropriate when it comes to a size of the cell, large format cell, the chemistry. I think it goes back to a lot of that, like you said.
Yeah, we've had some instances where we're designing products, and the difference between 5 mils on one dimension was probably an impact of 15% on the BOM cost of increase, because it was such a tight requirement. So, well, I guess we can do it, but it's going to be costly. Can you go find 5 more millimeters for me?
So yeah, I mean, you guys just summed it up well, right? It's really understanding the requirements versus the trade-off of commercialization and how it's going to play into your go-to-market strategy, right? I mean, you could design anything, honestly, to meet your needs, right? But is it going to be commercially viable, right? And that's where the discussion between the vendor and the OEM have to start early and often, and transparency and goals have to be set early on, because if those discussions are not happening early on, there's going to be a lot of gotchas at the end of the development cycle, and it might not be something that's commercially viable. Going back to our topic about battery technology, there's a ton of battery technology, but at what cost, right? Someone mentioned solid state. Solid state's there. From the scale perspective, it might not be the most cost efficient and cost effective, but you have solid state there. It's just not at a cost and a production scale that makes it viable for mass market.
Before we move on to further points in this discussion, we do have a question that is about BSS power banks and how they charge machines, but what or how do they get charged considering the amount of power they need?
I may have just been trying to type a response to that. It's an evolving industry itself, and if I understand the question right, or we're reading the right one, how do you get charging to some of these remote locations or big deployments? Presently, that's also a negotiation between vendor and OEM. What do you really need? In the most simplest form, what we're deploying in other areas of the world are large towables. And they're essentially just trailers with a large battery and a bidirectional DC-DC charger. So you plug that into your equipment, and you would tow it back and plug it into a fast charger. It's always a discussion. Do I need that AC side? I'm going to be plugging that towable into an AC outlet, and it's got an inverter on board, or the simplest mechanism for us is quite literally, it's just take a car, remove the car, you're left with the battery and the charging port, tow that around. So hopefully that gave some perspective there.
Sorry. I guess it also goes to the size, right? Because these battery powers or portable power banks, right, dependent on the size of deployment, because there's ones that are containers large, right, that are considered similar to ESS systems, right, portable ESS that are portable power banks, right, or there's small ones. So it really depends on the size of these battery power banks, as well as the infrastructure set up, right? So this is a very general question, but we could go deeper offline, dependent on what your requirements are.
Any other comments on that question?
Just one quick, like we're talking to size really. So, I know the construction industry is probably looking at a construction site, what do I need to park there during the day so that all that equipment can run all day long? And then what are the charging requirements to get it topped off overnight, right? So that's one model, is that power bank overnight is sucking up all the energy needed for an operation during the day. But I don't know that everyone or that anyone really knows exactly what that size is yet. Certainly hydraulic equipment is pretty power hungry, versus other types of ways to do motion. So um, that's to be determined. But there are several companies with offerings, both in the ground support equipment space. There's certainly some offerings that are kind of a small RV trailer size where they're meant, rather than using an auxiliary power unit, an APU, you can plug a jet into one of these things and power it for a period of time while it's at the gate. So we're seeing some offerings there. And there's another company that's they've got a towable device, and they're saying this is going to work at your construction site. And it's also kind of, something like a 20-foot long trailer. So if that gives anybody some perspective.
All right, great. Thank you for that. One thing that we'd like to touch upon is battery recycling. We do have a session later on of Powering the Future, Innovating Battery Recycling for a Sustainable Tomorrow. But can we talk a little bit about battery recycling and how that factors into the discussion?
Yeah, my perspective on it is that the technology is there today to recycle these batteries. The scale is still growing. And one of the largest hurdles we see is actually regulation and just transporting them. So it becomes almost prohibitive to ship them based on just DOT regulations. Or that to me, that's the biggest struggle right now. So the facilities are there; they can be recycled, but it's you see a lot of batteries piling up in different locations because that supply chain or reverse logistics chain just doesn't quite know what or where to go. So perhaps there just needs to be more dialogue around educating people, making it easier. Oftentimes you'll also see these intake forms from recycling facilities that are almost impossible to fill out if you haven't done it a few times or have a helping hand. So the technology, the processes are all there. It's just getting together as an industry and making it easy. That's the missing link right now.
So to add on to what Brendan just said is the reason why, at least here in the US/North America, there are a lot of hurdles. The technology is there, but there's hurdles, is because majority of lithium manufacturing doesn't reside in the US or in North America. It's starting to. We're starting to hear about gigafactories and whatnot, but a lot of that resided in Asia, started out in Asia, right? So the maturity of lithium production and the means to have recycling started out there. So in the sense, there are means for battery recycling in Asia that are mature. In Europe, there's government mandates, to Brendan's point about regulation, mandates that OEMs, if they are going to be integrating battery solutions, that they have to have a plan for battery recycling. So that's already mandated by the government. In the US, now we're starting to see battery manufacturing come up almost every week. I hear about something about a new battery manufacturer from the cell perspective or battery pack manufacturer coming up on board. We have to address it as a whole, as Brendan mentioned, because it's going to become a problem due to logistics, right? Transporting normal batteries, regular batteries, unused batteries is very defined, but used and batteries that have defects or damage or issues with it, that is where logistics and transportation become an issue. And they'll talk about it in the next session, but it's something that we definitely have to put into the forefront when you are electrifying with a battery solution.
Darren, did you have anything to add to that?
All great points. I would say it does seem, from our standpoint, it's regionalized. So it's as Rod and Brendan both said, it seems like APAC has the maturest, but then you've also got the EMEA region, North America. There doesn't seem to be a global recycler. I would say it does seem to be regionalized, and then one of to Rod's points in the EMEA market with the new EU battery passport regulations that they're starting to talk about with labeling. I think that's going to also work itself into it that could present challenges going forward.
Do you want to expand it all on the battery passport topic? That is something that we're starting to hear more about, even here in North America.
Yeah, we're in our beginning stages of understanding it. We've got a team that actually is looking into it, but it could change the way we label batteries or what's on the label of the batteries, the things they're going to require. I don't know if Brendan or Rod or Paulus have any other.
No, I mean, we've got internal review documents that are 100 pages long. I think in principle, there's good intent there, but it's another piece of legislation or more bureaucracy that just becomes very difficult to navigate. So with the struggles you have in transporting product here in North America to actually get to the recyclers, it's a good balance of practical, pragmatic, good intentions versus how it actually gets deployed. So there's some requirements in the passport program that it's going to be difficult and it's going to be a wild guess. So we'll see where it goes. The intentions are well, but not exactly sure there's actually a clear roadmap from anybody on how to actually get to a kind of a standardized process.
All right, great. We are starting to run down on our last couple of minutes here of time. I'd like to offer all of you just a chance if there are any additional points that you feel like you would like to cover. And if there are any other last minute questions that anyone in the audience has, please add those to the Q&A box now so that we can try to address those. We've been doing a pretty great job of answering questions as we've gone along, but if you do still have questions, please add those at this time. But in the meantime, any other comments that you'd like to share, gentlemen?
Because one last parting comment is just get started. I've seen too many organizations wait and wait and wait, and they're usually waiting for the wrong reasons, the right cell technology, but then they realize they're 10 years behind in integration. Get started, generally have a humble, open approach to your vendors as well. There's a lot of really fantastic companies that are here to help. From my pragmatic, practical, raw and honest side, try to drop some of the barriers that you may have in terms of here's your RFQ, letter of the law, and perhaps as if it's your first foray in electrification, have a bit of a more open approach to it. You may be pleasantly surprised at what is actually possible today.
Any other comments on that?
Yep.
Great. Well, this has been a great discussion. I thank you, all of our panelists, for joining us. But unfortunately, we're out of time. And as we noted earlier, this session is recorded and will be published and will be made available to you later on. So at this time, I'd like to again thank all the panelists, and I thank everyone in our audience for listening in.